Good evening, everyone. It's just wonderful to be here, and we are just delighted to have two distinguished alumni of the University of Texas who are both graduates of our Plan to Honors program and major as well, and who are also medical doctors. And Dr. Kim Monday and Dr. Seeley Massengill, welcome to our show this evening. It's just such a pleasure and an honor to have you here. And tonight we're going to talk about the humanities, disciplines in the arts, language, literature, history, philosophy, and religion dedicated to the exploration of the human condition. And more explicitly tonight, we're going to be talking about your own life experiences as humanities scholars and your professional lives as doctors. And so with that, I welcome you to our show. And I'd like to start with Dr. Massengill tonight and to think about the kind of importance of intergenerational storytelling. This is a fundamental feature of the humanities. And so in that spirit, I would like to ask you about your own story in terms of where you are from, how did you come to Plan 2 at UT, and we'll take it from there.
So I was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas. My older sister, was a Plan 2. She was the valedictorian in our high school, and all throughout school, it was, are you Berna's brother? Well, yes, I'm Berna's brother, and I was a good student. But it always sort of irked me that I was always Berna's brother. So I strove very diligently to try to make my way to get to the pinnacle that she'd reached. And when it came time to apply for college, getting into UT wasn't an issue and way back then. And but Plan 2 was still an achievement, and she'd made it, and I really wanted it, and I was lucky enough to be accepted. And so that was my focus. And as I look back on it, then it was just, I wanted to go to American Medical School. If you went to Plan 2, you're going to get to go, you were pretty much guaranteed if you managed to pass, you'd make it. And so that's what I wanted. But as I look back on it now, decades since, I recognize just how important it is to have had that chance when I was young to look at the world slightly differently than my colleagues who were biology majors or chemistry majors, and even the odd engineering major. They trained in almost a trade school where they were focused on their mission, what they wanted to do. They wanted to go to medical school too. And Plan 2 gave me the ability to study other things. Sports and athletics and antiquity, my favorite UT class of all time. It sounds like, and the scholarship athletes who took it believed it was a gut course. But it was actually a really fascinating view of something I didn't know anything, much like some of the comments we've heard earlier today. There's stuff I didn't know anything about, and I have really valued that. And as I've become somebody who's involved in interviewing medical students and applicants for our residency, looking for a rounded individual is so much more important than looking for somebody who we can teach them the subject matter.
Right.
Having a love of learning is so much more important.
Yes, and we're going to talk a lot more about that love of learning. Dr. Monday, I would love to hear about your story.
Well, I'm from Huntsville, Texas, small town, known for its prison and its university. A wonderful place to grow up. I'm a fifth generation Texan and third generation to go to UT. And I knew from whenever I was going to be a doctor. So it was very clear that I was going to spend the rest of my life sort of doing medicine. And so Plan 2 was very appealing because I knew that I would get a chance to learn other things instead of just the raw science. And so that's how I got to Plan 2. And looking back as well, I truly valued those 4 years. And every time I had the opportunity, tell students they really should spend those 4 years doing something different than what their application is going to be moving forward. I don't think there's anything that I learned many things, the fundamentals, but much of what we learned 20 years ago, we're not even using now in terms of scientifically. The things I learned in the Plan 2 program have been very valuable.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to answer Plan 2 what, because I was pre-med, so it was, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you wrote a senior thesis that I would love to hear more about.
What I remember about that, it was with a wonderful engineering professor. Her name was Margaret Maxey, and it was a cross-cultural analysis of aging and death. And she had taught a bioethics class seminar, which had 14 people in it. It was just wonderful. And I particularly remember her because the morning the Challenger blew up, I had her class, and we went and we were all shaken up. But the discussion that wrapped around what is the value of a life and should we have an escape pod, and then evolved into what obligation do scientists and people in medicine have to society to make sure that ethically that we have addressed those before the scientific discoveries are let loose in society. So she was probably my favorite, other than Paul Woodruff, which is everybody's favorite.
Fantastic. Yeah. So you mentioned ethical decision making, and thinking about your careers as an obstetrician, a gynecologist, you as a neurologist, Dr. Monday, and I would love to hear more about how the humanities has played a central role in your daily life as a clinician, dealing intergenerationally with families, patients, fellow colleagues in the medical profession, insurance companies, any number of different constituents. And so Dr. Massengill, how about?
I think that the lifelong love of learning and the way we were taught to question and to think is something that we use every day. I think that the exposure to different philosophies and different value systems is something that maybe the first decade of my medical career I didn't really think much about, because you're just trying to do the work you've been given and learn how to do what you do. But as I look back on it and I think about my career today and the things I do today, the bioethics, the ethics committees I sit on in the hospital, some of the tragic stories you hear about, it does give me a framework to base that I might not have if I didn't have that background.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr.
I
Monday.
agree. I don't think you walk into a room to evaluate a patient without having, and do it well, without having to understand what problem you're trying to solve. And you can't solve a problem if you don't understand who that person is. And that's really what the humanities or liberal arts are all about, is what is the meaning of life? What makes you you? And it may be that I'm going to help you and you have ALS, and I'm going to help you and you don't want to be ventilator dependent at the end of life. Or it may be that that's what you want and you want to live another 20 years. Or, I have to understand who you are. I have to understand culturally whether or not you're going to take the medicine I gave you.
Right.
And when I give you samples and tell you to fill the prescription, you're not going to understand that you have to actually fill the prescription. The samples are enough to fix you. There are a lot of those sort of things you have to do every day when you walk in a room in order to be effective. And it's sort of funny, doctors are sort of exposed now to the rating systems and internet and transparency. And if you look at a Press Ganey rating of a doctor now, it's not about how much neurology did she know, did she make the right diagnosis. It's, did the doctor communicate to you what the findings were? Do you understand what your medicines are supposed to do for you? These are the sort of things, this sort of communication ability that's very important, that you're not taught in organic chemistry, right? And so I think that's where the liberal arts are very helpful for me.
Yeah. And to follow up with that, just to think about, are there works of literature or art or memoir or any other kind of humanities work that have inspired you in terms of your own approach to medicine?
Well, I'm an Oliver Sacks fan, no surprise, and so I enjoy anything that he's written. And I was trying to decide what field of medicine to go into right about the time the movie Awakenings came out, and so I think that sort of subconsciously affected what I did. So I enjoy reading. I enjoy reading. Period. I think that's one of the wonderful things you have to read to get a liberal arts degree, which is a good thing because you know, learning in those 4 years of college, it's not a means to an end, it is an end itself. And so I don't go, there's not one night I don't go to bed and think, you know, I really could have done another hours reading on the new genetic discovery and some esoteric neurologic disease. It's a lifelong process, which is one of the reasons I think we love what we do.
Yeah, I'd want to echo that it's, you know, what I learned in medical school in 81 to 85 is there's a lot of useful stuff, and there's a lot of it's like language class. I tell students now that going to medical school is like learning the language, but you're going to need to learn how to learn. And I do think that I have a couple of partners, and that's what they say. They say, you're really smart, and that's why none of this seems hard to you, and that's why it's harder for us. But I don't think it's just that I'm that bright, quite frankly. I peaked intellectually in high school. I'm very confident of that. But I do think that having that ability to learn how to learn and to have a love of learning and a thirst for knowledge, just for the sake of knowledge, is something that students who really focus on what's the next milestone I need to hit to get to where I'm going, what am I looking for, it's unfortunate. And I do tell people all the time that I think that there's an enormous value to the way I learned before I went to medical school. And that's what we're learning about teaching learners, is that if we don't teach them in medical school how to think and how to learn, it's not that important to teach them facts, because in your pocket, your phone, the facts are all there now on your phone. You don't have to carry a bunch of knowledge around your head, but you need to know whether the facts there are the right facts and how do you interpret data. And so I really think that, again, philosophy, you talked about, you know, what I can't point to a work and say, but I think that the discussion about value systems and how do we look at the world is important.
Yeah, and it begs other questions about leadership too in the humanities, and what can the humanities teach us about being effective and compassionate leaders. And so I wanted to address that question as well. Dr. Monday.
Well, I think we both are involved in medical leadership, and as I'm sure everybody is aware who's gone to the doctor lately, we have a crisis in healthcare. And doctors are not at the forefront of trying to help with that crisis. You know, most people know the key to being a good leader is to listen, and you need 3 years. And I think that is obviously you learn to listen and to understand different perspectives, to figure out puzzles. And when you go through Dr. Woodruff's philosophy class, a table's not a table, and you know, all those wonderful things you're taught. So I think that in terms of leadership, humanities is a nice preparation for that. And I think in terms of physician leaders, we need more of them, more effective leaders. We have some very, very difficult ethical problems right now in medicine in terms of healthcare. Is it a right? Is it a privilege? Who gets it? Who's going to pay for it? If it's not a right, then what are we going to do with the folks who don't have access and affect all of our lives? So I think there's a real role for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, again, we just echo each other. I think that the values discussions about what is valued, who values what, are your values the right values, are there universal values? Those are things that make it very difficult to have a conversation if you don't understand that there are perspectives that might not be yours. And can you grant someone who has a perspective that's different than yours value? Right. I think that's important, and it does teach you to be, again, servant leader. That's what, when I talk to my peers about why do I do what I do, I always try to say it's not about me, it's about y'all. And I do think that the best leaders are servant leaders. They're there to not to make themselves happy, but they're to do it for others, and that's important to me. So, and I think part of that is based in the fact that I was exposed to different value systems early on.
Yeah. So as we continue our discussion, one of the things I also wanted to ask you about is your personal life in terms of when you're away from the hospital or the clinic and the kinds of things that help restore you and how the humanities plays a role in that, because this is something that I speak to personally because I'm the daughter of a doctor, an oncologist who would come home very late at night and he would pour a drink and then he would go to our little music room and he would start playing Brahms on the piano. And this was a real release for my father. And so I'm curious if there are artistic or humanities-based kinds of forms of exploration and rejuvenation that really are important to you.
Well, I do pour the drink, but I don't play the Brahms part. But one of the things I loved about Plan 2 was I had the opportunity to take other classes that weren't what everybody else was doing that was trying to become a doctor, and art history was one of them. So I love art history. My partner and I have 2 children that are 11-year-old twins, and we pretty much drag them all over the world. Travel does refresh me, it rejuvenates me. It's the cultural experience, letting them see the privilege that they have and what else is out there, and that our way is not by any means the only way.
Right.
And so for me, it's travel, I think, is the biggest passion that I have.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well,
Dr.
one of my passions is my Texas Longhorn, so it's been a little bad lately.
The humanities can help with that too.
Yes, it does. It has taught me how to let go and not worry so much. So it's been
The larger
perspective. It's been instructive. I used to be in a funk for a week when we lost, and now it's only about an hour. So that's my wife would tell you that's a huge growth for me. But my wife and I recently started taking dance lessons, so I guess that's quasi humanities.
Oh yes.
And it's been really instructive. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great experience. But I again, traveling is great, and just that willingness to see more of the world, and that there are perspectives that don't involve my little tiny, weird Fort Worth corner of the world. You know, it's nice to know that there's more out there, and I do feel kind of blessed that I've been able to take my children traveling, take them across the country and across the ocean once. So, you know, it's nice, and part of that is lucky, and part of it is that's really been important to us. So.
Excellent.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. One of the things that in the kind of contemporary political climate that we live in, there's a lot of talk about making education, especially higher education, more in line with meeting the needs of a particular workforce. And as Plan 2 graduates who became doctors, I would be curious to hear your perspective on that kind of thinking and what your sense of where that might lead us or what might be done.
I think the president got in trouble for saying something about that at some point. And Fareed Zakaria wrote a nice book to defend that. I think it's wonderful to have a trade. We have a trade. And I think for some people, depending on what they want to do in life, it's always good to have a skill. I think part of what the humanities and liberal arts are about is producing good citizens and returning those that are educated at University of Texas, wherever it might be, back into the world as better people. And part of being a good citizen is to care about things other than in your neighborhood, care about other neighborhoods and other people's condition, and whatever political party you happen to agree with, to realize that there are differences, and living in a democracy, we have to respect everybody's voice, whether you like it or not. Right. And I think that learning about history and learning essentially about many of these wars that we're fighting again and again and again, the same exact issue all around the world, and making us better global citizens is very, very important. I'm not sure you can get that in a 2-year trade school, and so my opinion is that the more humanities exposure is the better is better.
Yeah. It is so terrifically short-sighted to take young men and women who are really not intellectually mature and to make them pick what they want to do based on whatever people pick things based on, and then say that none of that stuff has value. It has tremendous value. And I think that compromise and discussion and how to get along, I just can't, yes, I can't ignore the fact that that undergraduate education is very expensive, and there's a lot of debt out there, and we ought to figure out, but we ought to be having a values-based discussion about that, and not just a dollars and cents discussion. You know, is corporate America's goal to have an educated workforce? It ought to be. And so how do we pay for that? Who profits, who benefits? And I think those are the discussions we ought to be having. And rather than listening to a small group of very ideologically set people who believe that we don't need book learning, is tragic. And it's really refreshing that our institution has stood up pretty proudly for the value of education. So I'm very proud of that, and it makes me very happy.
Absolutely. Indeed, because at the heart of what you do as healers, as clinicians, and in your professional life is you are grappling with questions of life and death. And I see the humanities dealing with these same life and death issues. And so I wonder, in a society that kind of denies death, if you will, and has all sorts of freighted politics about life and death, what do you have to say as medical professionals, you know, to the kind of broader public about the human condition in a society where we have these difficult dialogues?
Well, our society, as we all know, values youth, and nobody wants to talk about death. Our country does it in a terrible way compared to many, many other countries that don't value and respect elders and don't take care of them as they should. You know, we're all going to die. That's no mystery. It may happen tonight. It may happen in 30 years, but it's going to happen. And so I think having that discussion with patients, probably on my end of the spectrum, other than when they're born, is probably an easier time to have it. But
My life is happier. I will tell you.
his Press Ganey is much better, I'm sure, than mine.
So true. You don't know.
So I do think those are. I will say that in the last 18 years I've been doing ethics and palliative care and supportive medicine, and that's been something I've been fairly passionate about. There has been a little bit of a sea change in terms of patients are more accepting of discussing end-of-life care and discussing things like what is palliative care. Well, it doesn't mean you're going to hospice. It just means that we're going to manage your symptoms so you're not hurting anymore, or that you're comfortable. And this is what you value in life, and you want to go to your grandson's baseball games, and that's your goal, and that's what we're going to work towards. So I do think that's a big part of my practice. And again, explain to somebody what brain death is and why you have to take someone off of a respirator when their lungs are moving, their heart's beating, and they look pink and just like, they should, but they're dead by all legal definitions, is a hard thing to do, and certainly not something I learned to do in biochemistry. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I just again, that whole value systems and looking at how the public and the patient, the index patient, it's not about, and then it's not about populations. We can talk a lot about population. When you're talking about one-on-one with a patient, it's about their choices, their values, and being open to the idea that their values and your values might not mix, and as long as you're giving them the right information about what you know to be the science of it, letting them pick the value of that. I do think that I learned a lot of that from the way I was educated.
And you may not cure them, but you'll always care for them. You're never going to abandon them, which I think is key.
Right.
Which is a continuous relationship. Yeah, fantastic. Well, it would seem that the American Association of Medical Colleges would agree with our conversation this evening because the 2015 Medical College Admission Test, otherwise known as the MCAT, now has a critical analysis and reading skills section coming from, and I quote, a variety of humanities and social sciences disciplines. So this evening we've talked about your professional and personal lives and what the humanities have meant to your lives, and thinking about personal and community well-being, I think, are humanities questions, to be sure. And to think about intergenerational conversation, to empathically imagine the lives of others is central to a life well lived, a life that is healthy, a life that is ethical. And I think about my own love of the humanities, thinking about the music that I love, Thomas Tallis, choral work from 16th century Tudor England that can take me right back many centuries. The redemptive power of someone like Claude Brown writing Man-Child in the Promised Land about his healing, or Patti Smith, the musician, writing in her memoir, Just Kids, illuminates the power of the humanities as a kind of force for healing and well-being across the centuries. And I want to take this opportunity to just thank you so much for being here. This has been such a pleasure. Dr. Massengill, Dr. Monday, it's a real honor to have you among our beloved community at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Great to be on campus.
Oh, great.